The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet suburban cul-de-sac as Danielle Harris arranged flowers in a vase on the kitchen counter. She had just finished her shift at the pediatric clinic and was looking forward to a peaceful evening. Her children, Noah and Lena, were upstairs finishing their homework, and the smell of chicken roasting in the oven filled the home with warmth. They had only lived in the Oak Ridge Estates community for 6 months, but Danielle already understood how the neighborhood worked. Or rather, how certain people thought it should work. The HOA was strict about everything: lawn height, mailbox color, trash can placement. And then there were the side glances, the snide comments masked as neighborly concern, and the mistakes that always seemed to land on her doorstep. But she tried not to let it get to her. Her husband, Captain Marcus Harris, had told her on move-in day, "We belong anywhere we choose to live, Danny. Let them adjust." He was away at the base for a few days of training, and wasn't expected home until the weekend. That evening, Danielle hummed to herself as she wiped the counters, when suddenly, bang, bang, bang. The pounding at the front door was so loud she jumped. Her first thought was that maybe it was a delivery gone wrong, or perhaps one of the neighborhood kids pulling a prank. But then came a voice, stern, commanding, official. "Police department, open the door." Danielle froze. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. The kids crept halfway down the stairs, their eyes wide. "Mom?" Noah whispered. She lifted a hand to quiet him and took a breath to steady herself. She hadn't done anything wrong. There was no reason for police to be at her door. Yet that didn't stop the unease that began to creep into her bones. She approached the door cautiously. Through the frosted glass she could make out 2 figures standing on the porch, one tall, one stockier, both with hands resting near their belts. Danielle unlocked the door but didn't open it fully. She cracked it just enough to see their badges and uniforms. "Can I help you, officers?" she asked, keeping her voice calm. The taller officer, a man with a hardened jawline, glanced past her into the home before speaking. "We received a call from the HOA about a disturbance at this residence. They reported an unauthorized resident and possible neighborhood violation." Danielle blinked, stunned. "A disturbance? There must be a mistake. It's just me and my children here right now." The stocky officer pulled out a notepad, not looking convinced. "Ma'am, we're going to need identification and confirmation that you live here. We were told someone suspicious had entered the property earlier." Danielle's jaw tightened. Suspicious. Unauthorized. Someone had called the police on her, at her own home. The sound of footsteps suddenly echoed from the driveway, a car door shut. Both officers glanced back. Danielle turned her head, heart stuttering. A familiar voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" Standing at the edge of the walkway, duffel bag over his shoulder, was Marcus, still in full military dress uniform, boots polished, hat tucked under his arm. His presence radiated calm authority. He had come home a day early. Both officers stared, their expressions shifting instantly. And just like that, everything changed. Marcus set his duffel bag down gently on the porch, his gaze steady and unreadable as he looked between the 2 officers. The taller one instinctively straightened, as though suddenly aware of the weight of the uniform in front of him. Danielle exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The children were still crouched quietly on the stairs, peeking through the banister, but relief softened their wide eyes when they saw their father. "Officers," Marcus said evenly, stepping closer. "I'm Captain Marcus Harris, United States Army. This is my home. What seems to be the issue?" The taller officer cleared his throat and shifted awkwardly. "We, received a call from the Homeowners Association about suspicious activity at this address. They claimed someone might be trespassing." Marcus glanced at Danielle, then back to the officers. His voice remained calm but carried a tone that commanded attention. "And did they mention that the supposed trespasser was the legal homeowner?" The shorter officer glanced down at his notepad before muttering, "We were only told someone reported an unauthorized individual inside the property. We're required to follow up." Danielle stepped forward slightly, still holding the door open. "I've been here all day. No one unauthorized has set foot in this house. If the HOA had a question, they could have sent an email or a notice. They know exactly who lives here." Her patience was thinning, and the tremor beneath her voice no longer came from fear, but frustration. Just then, movement caught everyone's attention. Descending the sidewalk with a clipboard and self-importance practically stitched into her cardigan, walked Ellen Whitford, president of the Oak Ridge Estates HOA. 2 other board members lagged behind her, whispering as they followed. Ellen approached the porch with the air of someone expecting applause for her actions. "There you are," she said sharply, not even looking at Marcus at first. "Officers, I'm glad you came quickly. We've had multiple reports of a woman entering this residence while the owner is away, and the trash bins were still at the curb past the approved pickup time. It's clear there's a violation here." Marcus slowly turned his full attention to her. That was when she finally noticed him in uniform, her bravado flickering. "I am the owner," Marcus said calmly. "My wife lives here with me. Those are our children. And you sent the police to our door over trash bins?" Ellen blinked, visibly thrown off but scrambling to maintain her footing. "Well, we can't just assume anyone is supposed to be here. We have community standards to uphold." Several neighbors mentioned unfamiliar activity. Danielle folded her arms. "Unfamiliar activity? I've spoken to half this neighborhood while walking my kids to the bus stop, but somehow no one recognizes me when it's time to call the police?" One of the board members behind Ellen, a gray-haired man with nervous eyes, shifted uncomfortably. The taller officer looked increasingly displeased with the situation. Marcus straightened with quiet authority. "If you had concerns you could have contacted us directly. Instead you escalated to law enforcement without cause." Ellen bristled but her confidence was cracking. "We were following protocol." "No," Marcus replied with a calm so controlled it felt like a warning. "You were following assumptions." The officers glanced at each other. The taller one finally spoke with a note of apology. "Captain Harris, Mrs. Harris, we'll just need to verify your IDs, and then we'll be on our way. This appears to be a misunderstanding." Danielle nodded curtly, and stepped inside to retrieve her wallet. Ellen, however, was not ready to retreat. She lifted her chin and whispered to the other board member, "This is exactly why rules exist. Some people think they can move in and do whatever they want." Marcus heard her. He didn't flinch, but his eyes hardened. And that was the moment Ellen realized she'd made a much bigger mistake than calling the cops. Danielle returned with her wallet and handed her driver's license to the officers. Marcus did the same, retrieving his military ID from the inner pocket of his uniform jacket. The taller officer inspected both, visibly uncomfortable with how unnecessary all of this was turning out to be. The shorter officer spoke first, his tone softer than before. "Everything matches. You're the homeowners. We're sorry for the disturbance." Before Danielle could respond, Ellen folded her arms with forced composure. "Oh, it's not personal," she sniffed. "We enforce rules equally. If there's irregular activity, we act. We have concerned residents," Marcus cut in, his voice controlled but firm. "And did any of your concerned residents bother to knock on the door before assuming my wife didn't belong here?" Ellen hesitated, opening her mouth but no words came out. Danielle stepped forward, her tone steady but edged with steel. "You've sent notices before about mailbox repainting and lawn trimming. You know our names. You know who lives here. But today someone unfamiliar entering our own home was enough to call the police?" A flicker of guilt crossed the face of one of the HOA board members, Jim Collins, the gray-haired man who had trailed behind Ellen earlier. He adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "For the record," he said quietly, "I didn't make that call. And I don't think all of us were aware police were being contacted." Ellen shot him a sharp look. "We act as a board, you know that." Jim met her gaze. "We act with judgment, or at least we should." The taller officer handed back their IDs. "Captain Harris, Mrs. Harris, we've confirmed everything. There's no issue here. We apologize again for the disturbance." But Marcus wasn't done. "Before you leave I'd like a written report number for this visit," he said. "If this happens again, I want records showing there was no cause." The officers exchanged glances, realizing he knew exactly how to handle situations like this. The shorter one nodded. "Of course, sir. I'll note that the report was based solely on a third-party call with no evidence of wrongdoing." Danielle noticed Ellen fidgeting. She held the officer's gaze. "Please also document that we were not notified by the HOA of any concerns before law enforcement was involved." The tall officer nodded as he wrote. "Noted." Just then Lena and Noah crept down the stairs standing beside their mother. Lena clutched Danielle's hand, eyes wide. Noah stood beside Marcus, glancing at the officers, then at Ellen. Marcus rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "You see this?" he said quietly to Noah, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is why we stand our ground with dignity." Ellen swallowed hard, suddenly looking much smaller on the porch she'd once marched across with absolute confidence. As the officers walked back toward their patrol car, Jim lowered his gaze and spoke under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. "This could have been handled so differently." Ellen didn't respond, but Danielle did. "Oh, don't worry," she said evenly, "we're not done handling it," and the way she said it made even Ellen take a step back. As the patrol car pulled away, the tension on the porch thickened. Ellen stood stiffly, arms crossed, trying to recover her composure. Her two fellow board members lingered a step behind, their earlier confidence replaced with unease. Marcus picked up his duffel bag but didn't break eye contact with her. "We moved here to raise our kids in peace," he said. "Not to be treated like intruders in our own home." Ellen straightened defensively. "The HOA has to respond to resident reports. It's our responsibility to maintain community standards." Danielle stepped forward. "Community standards don't include calling the cops on homeowners without a single attempt at communication. We've complied with every notice you've sent, even the petty ones." Jim cleared his throat delicately. "Danielle's right. You never informed the board you were calling police, Ellen. You acted alone." Ellen shot him a warning glare. "I acted on behalf of the HOA. "No," Marcus said calmly, "you acted on bias." The words hit sharper than raised voices ever could. Ellen stiffened, her jaw tightening. "Are you accusing me of—" "I don't need to accuse you of anything," Marcus replied. "Your actions speak for themselves. The assumption that my wife didn't belong here put officers at our door, in front of our children, for no legitimate reason." The other board member, a woman named Kara, finally spoke up. "Maybe we should schedule a meeting and discuss the complaint process." Danielle turned to her. "A meeting is already happening, right now. Because my kids watched officers show up at our door like we were criminals, over trash bins and assumptions." Kara looked down, guilt creeping across her face. Marcus shifted his stance, his voice measured. "Here's what's going to happen. First, I want the name of the board member or neighbor who made the false report." Ellen hesitated. "That information is public record," Marcus finished for her. "And if it was you, we'll find out anyway. Second, we're filing a formal grievance against anyone involved in this escalation." Jim nodded quietly in agreement. "I'll back that." This crossed a line. Ellen's confidence was faltering. "Let's not exaggerate, mistakes happen." Danielle's eyes flashed, not with loud anger, but with something colder. "A mistake is misdelivering mail, sending law enforcement to a black family's door because you don't recognize the woman who lives there? That's not a mistake. That's profiling." Ellen opened her mouth but had no response. "And third," Marcus added, "we're requesting that all future HOA communication regarding our property be submitted in writing. No more surprise visits, no more phone calls to the police. You deal with us directly, or you don't deal at all." Jim exhaled with relief. "That's reasonable." Ellen's lips thinned, but she knew she was outnumbered. "Fine. If that's what you want, we'll formalize future communication." Danielle stared at her evenly. "Oh, we want more than that. But this is where we're starting." The board members retreated down the walkway, Ellen lagging behind with a stiff posture and an expression that masked more fear than pride. She cast one final glance at Marcus's uniform before turning away. Noah looked up at his dad. "Are they coming back?" Marcus put a hand on his shoulder. "Not like this," he said. "Next time we'll be ready." As the porch light flickered on and the chill of evening settled in, Danielle closed the front door, not with fear, but with resolve. 2 days later, the HOA board gathered in the community center for their scheduled monthly meeting. What they didn't expect was a row of homeowners already waiting inside, many of whom had heard whispers about what happened at the Harris residence. Marcus and Danielle arrived together. Marcus wore civilian clothes, but his posture still carried the weight of command. Danielle held a folder neatly packed with documents, emails, notices, proof of residency, and a written statement she planned to enter into the record. Ellen sat at the head of the long table, pale but trying to appear composed. Jim and Kara sat beside her, exchanging uneasy glances as the Harrises approached. Before Ellen could open the meeting, Marcus spoke clearly. "We'll begin with the incident at our home. It needs to be addressed on record." A murmur rippled through the room. Ellen tried to interject. "This isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," Danielle said calmly. "You involved the entire community when you sent police to our door." Jim nodded, pushing his glasses up his nose. "I move that we add the Harris complaint to today's agenda." Kara seconded it, and with that, Ellen was overruled. Danielle stepped forward. "On Tuesday, officers appeared at my home in response to a false report that I was an intruder in my own house. The HOA did not contact us beforehand. No notice, no call. Just an assumption, one that put my children and me in danger." She placed her folder on the table. We have already reached out to a civil rights attorney. We're not here to threaten, we're here to document, formally and publicly, what occurred. Several residents shifted uncomfortably. One woman in the second row raised her hand. I live across the street, I saw the officers arrive, I didn't know the whole story, but I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have gone through that. Another man spoke up. We've had teenagers throwing parties and actual thefts in this neighborhood, and nobody called the cops then. Why was this treated like an emergency? Ellen's composure cracked. There were multiple complaints. It wasn't personal. Jim leaned in. We checked. There was one call, and you made it. The room fell silent. Ellen swallowed hard. Marcus clasped his hands behind his back. We're requesting 3 things and we expect them implemented immediately. He held up one finger. First, a written apology from the board, acknowledging that no laws or HOA rules were broken. A second finger. Second, mandatory anti-bias and procedural training for all board members, paid for by HOA funds. A third, any future complaints involving homeowners must be verified with direct contact before law enforcement is involved, unless there is an immediate threat to safety. Whispers moved through the crowd. Some nodded. Others looked ashamed they hadn't spoken up sooner. Jim spoke firmly. I support these terms, and I motion we vote on them now. Kara seconded without hesitation. All eyes turned to Ellen. She glanced around the room, at the residents who were no longer silent, at the man in uniform who had every right to be angrier than he was, at the woman she had humiliated in front of her own children. She lowered her gaze. Motion carried, she muttered. One by one, hands raised in agreement. Danielle exhaled for the first time that evening. As the meeting adjourned, several neighbors approached to offer apologies and support. Some were genuine, some were awkward. Marcus responded with grace, but he never stopped watching Ellen. Before leaving, Danielle turned back to the board table. We didn't move here to make enemies, she said softly but firmly. But we also didn't move here to be silent. Ellen gave a small, strained nod. Outside, the evening air was cool. The kids ran ahead toward the car, chatting like everything was normal again. And in a way, it finally was. Marcus opened the passenger door for Danielle. You handled that perfectly, he said. She smiled faintly. We handled it. As they drove home past quiet lawns and identical mailboxes, the neighborhood looked the same as it always had. But it no longer felt like a place that could silence them. It felt like theirs.